Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Lexington Community Forum, the innovative life of Garrett Morgan. I am Mary Hughes, co-president of the League of Women Voters Lexington, and I am here with League co-president Jennifer Jackson. Our speaker tonight is Sandra Morgan, granddaughter of Garrett Morgan. I'm sorry, I lost my place, Sandra, sorry. Ms. Morgan currently serves as Director of External Affairs and Communications for Kent State University College of Arts and Sciences. She has nearly 30 years experience in marketing, communications, and international business development. In her position at Kent State, she is responsible for identifying and developing external relationships and creating opportunities that support the strategic goals of the university. She also heads the communications team for the College of Arts and Sciences. Previously, Ms. Morgan worked with the World Trade Center Cleveland and currently serves as the honorary consul for the United Kingdom in Ohio. She holds a BA from Smith College and an EMBA from Kent State University. And now we'll turn our program over to Ms. Morgan. Sandra?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Jen, for inviting me to come and speak to such a wonderful group today. I'm really delighted to be here, albeit virtually, and I'm happy to share a little bit of information with you about my grandfather, Garrett Morgan, who is native to Paris, Kentucky. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. If you'll give me just a minute to get myself sorted out here. Here we go. There we go. And I hope that you can all see the screen. If you have any issues or anything, let me know. So again, my name is Sandra Morgan, and I'm here to share a little bit of information with you about my grandfather, Garrett Morgan, who for the most part lived his life here in Northeast Ohio, but had his beginnings in Kentucky. As many of you know, he was born in Paris, Kentucky, actually Claysville, which, as I understand, was the African-American section of town. He was born in 1877, and he was one of 7 children. Typically we hear that there were between 9 and 11 children in his family. However, we were only able to positively identify 7 of those siblings. I'd like to discuss his life with you in 3 different sections: Garrett Morgan, the adventurer; Garrett Morgan, entrepreneur and inventor; and then finally, Garrett Morgan, civic-minded citizen and person in Cleveland. 3 distinct parts of his life, but I think that you'll get a very good sense of who he was. So let's talk about Garrett Morgan, the adventurer. As many of you may know, again, he was born in 1877, and by 1893, he had finished his schooling there in Kentucky and decided that it was time to move on to bigger and better places in his mind to seek his fortune. Kentucky at the time was still a part of the South, and there were Jim Crow laws in effect there. And he didn't feel that he could meet his highest and best potential in Kentucky. So he made his way across the border and settled into Cincinnati for a little bit. He worked in Cincinnati as a horse groomer and kind of a handyman. He was a young man, and so he was still kind of thinking and finding his way. The one thing that he did know was that he was very smart, that he had a lot of big ideas, and that he was going to make something of himself. And so he thought that Cincinnati might be the place for that. Turns out Cincinnati was very much like Kentucky in his mind. And so he decided that he was going to head for the bright lights and the big city, Cleveland, Ohio. At that time, Cleveland was a place of great promise. There was a lot going on here in terms of entrepreneurship, manufacturing, transportation, There were a number of railroads here. There were some big magnets here. John D. Rockefeller was here. There was all sorts of things going on. Edison was here and had a thriving shop. In fact, my grandfather said that he wanted to be the Black Thomas Edison. And that's why he made his way to Cleveland. Now, how did he get here? Well, he didn't have much money, and so he decided to hop a train. And he rode the train to Cleveland. And when he got on the train, he met another young man who also was looking to seek his fortune by the name of Bill Boyd. Okay, Bill Boyd and my grandfather would become lifelong friends. They would both become well-to-do entrepreneurs in Northeast Ohio and well-respected throughout the community, both in terms of their business as well as civically. My grandfather would say that when he arrived in Cleveland, he had a dime in his pocket, but a song in his heart, because he could absolutely feel the energy in Cleveland and the spirit of entrepreneurship and growth, and he was looking forward to that. So when he got to Cleveland, there was a small but growing African-American community in Northeast Ohio. This was before the Great Migration of the 1920s. And so the community was still relatively small here, but it was fine because he was able to get in and fit in very quickly. So he started his first job actually working in the textile industry. It may not be known to you, but Northeast Ohio was one of the many large centers for textiles in the United States. In fact, it was in the top 5 with New York, Chicago, and other big cities, Philadelphia and the like. And so there was a lot of manufacturing going on here and a lot of sewing. My grandfather started at a place called Root McBride, and then he moved on to L.N. Gross. While he was at Root McBride, he noticed one thing, and he was there as literally the handyman and the person who swept up the big dust bunnies. Because as you can imagine, any place where they were sewing clothing and it was all cotton, there would be a lot of cotton dust and threads in the air, and it was his job to get all that up. Why? Because fire was a real fear at that time, and there couldn't be any kind of dust bunnies or anything hanging around that could potentially catch on fire. So my grandfather noticed one thing, that the belts on the sewing machines would break down, and it happened quite frequently. They were leather belts, and they were typically sewn together, or if they had been repaired, sometimes they would be stapled together or put together with some sort of metal, and they broke all the time. Well, that was problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one, many of the women, Eastern European women who worked as seamstresses in these factories, were paid by the piece. And so if they didn't complete their pieces, or if they had to stop because their machine was broken, they didn't get paid. At the same time, the factory owners were paid by the completed piece. And so if the machines were breaking down and they were unable to completely finish the pieces, then they didn't get paid either. And that was problematic for everyone. Many times the women would be fired, and they were helping to take care of their families. The owners would lose money, and it was just generally a bottleneck all around. So my grandfather put his thinking cap on and thought, okay, what can I do? What would help this situation? Well, the first thing that he thought about was, let's make this band out of rubber, and let's make it a continuous band, just like a giant rubber band is what it looked like. But he also said it takes more than just having this rubber band. It's really the tension on the band that creates the problem, that it flies off or that it snaps and that sort of thing. Because as a reminder, sewing machines then were fueled by foot power, and there was a pedal at the bottom, and the women used their feet in order to move the sewing machine. So, he came up with this idea and he called over his boss and said, listen, I'd like for you to try this out. Let's just try it out on a couple of sewing machines as a test. Well, lo and behold, those machines didn't break down because the belts didn't break. The tension, the way that he configured the belt, which was in a figure eight, um, evenly distributed the tension on the sewing machine wheel. And so women were able to fly through their work. They were so delighted with my grandfather's idea that they decided two things. Number one, they said, don't worry, Garrett, we will patent this on your behalf, which I don't know if they ever did or not. That is kind of lost to history. But the other thing they did was they gave him $150 as a bonus for his work, and he received a promotion. In 1895, $150 was a lot of money by any standard for anyone. And to be promoted from the guy who picks up the dust bunnies to someone who maintains the machines was quite a feat for him. He was quite proud of that and very excited. It was during this time that he met my grandmother, Mary Hašek. She was a Czech seamstress, born in Prague, moved here into Northeast Ohio with her family. And she and a number of her sisters also worked in various factories sewing. Bohemian seamstresses was a thing here in Northeast Ohio. At any rate, they struck up a conversation and a friendship, and it was noticed by the owners of the factory. And they said, oh, this is against the rules. You cannot, you can't have a relationship with Mary or any of the other seamstresses for that matter. And that is primarily because they are white. So you either have to give up your relationship with Mary and never talk to her or anyone else, or you have to give up your job. Well, my grandfather was smitten and he said, that's fine, then I'll give up my job. And in a show of what I think is great bravery, my grandmother said, I will too. And she left, they both left the company together. Fast forward a few months later, they got married. They were married in 1908. And again, that was, it was quite a thing in 1908 for an African-American man and a Bohemian woman to get married. Her family, not everyone, but certainly her father disowned her and went so far as to reach out to the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland and ask that she be excommunicated because she married my grandfather. The church complied and she was excommunicated from the Catholic Church, which I know broke her heart, but she managed. While they, after they were married and after they decided, they were going to strike out on their own business-wise, my grandfather opened a number of businesses. In today's young terminology, we would say he was a real hustler. He did a little bit of everything in order to keep himself and his wife going. He opened a poultry store. My grandmother sewed beautifully. They hired a few other people away from their company, and they started a small factory of their own, where they not only did piecework, but then they started to manufacture children's clothing and the like, and they opened their own store and sold that clothing. They did all sorts of things in order to keep themselves afloat. And by all measures, it went pretty well. My grandfather was satisfied. He was able to buy a home. In fact, he was able to buy a home and then the home next door to it, and to build, what we would call, his workshop or his inventor's cave. So he was doing okay. Doing just okay, but doing okay. All right. So as it turns out, one day he was looking for a way, because another one of the problems with these sewing machines, never mind the belts, was that sometimes the needles would get really, really hot and it would scorch the fabric, because again, we were talking about 100% cotton. And if you are sewing something white or whatever color it is, and the needle gets hot and scorches the fabric, then that piece is no longer any good. So my grandfather was in his workshop and trying to figure out some sort of a lubricant that he could use on the needles that would not stain the fabric, but would also give it, give it the ease of movement that it needed so that it wouldn't get burning hot and scorch the fabric. Today, needles are treated with a little bit of silicone or some such in order to make sure that the needle moves smoothly through fabric. Well, and so my grandmother called him in for lunch. He grabbed a cloth, he wiped his hands. It was one of those curly haired cloths, and he put it down and went in, washed his hands, ate his lunch. When he came back outside, or to his workshop, he noticed that the hairs on the cloth had straightened out. He thought, this is interesting. And so he called over his Airedale dog and smeared a little, not all the entire dog, but smeared a little bit of it, on the dog's like neck and shoulders, and then washed it off. And he noticed that the dog's hair straightened too. So of course, then what's next? He takes himself in the house and he tries it out on his own hair. Which is, in my opinion, a very risky move because anything could have happened. But it worked out just fine. He went in, he put it on, left it on for a little bit, washed his hair, and his hair was silky straight and smooth. Voila. Born then the Garrett Morgan Hair Refinery Company. So he had a product that really relaxed the hair, that straightened one's hair. All right, and it was immensely popular. So to complement this hair straightening potion, he created a cap. All right, and the cap looked very much like, in my opinion, the old leather football helmets. And so he had instructions. You could, put this stuff on your hair, straighten your hair, wash it out, comb it out flat, and then put on this cap. Well, okay, so men wanted to have the Rudolph Valentino look. And so he then sewed pipe cleaners into the 2 layers of fabric of the cap so that when men put it on, and by the way, this was a product that was used primarily by men. When they put the cap on and then they would go to bed, when they woke up in the morning, they would have a slight wave in their hair, like the Sheik of Araby. It was immense, and he sold it that way. I mean, he literally said, do you want to look like the Sheik of Araby? Do you want to have that suave and sophisticated look? And it became very popular. He then came up with a whole line of hair pomades, hair dyes, and that sort of thing to complement his his straightening potion. And he bragged that his products, with the exception of the hair straightening potion, were now we would say they were organic, right? That they were all products that couldn't hurt you or couldn't hurt your hair. And when he went on the road to showcase his products at barbershops and all over the place, at the end of his presentation, he would prove it by taking a bottle of the very famous Garrett Morgan black hair oil stain and drinking it and saying, you see, you can drink this black hair oil stain and and you're going to be just fine. I'm sure, and he did that quite a few times. The long and the short of it is that he had, as you'll see on this picture, he had the Garrett Morgan specialty heavy hair pressing comb, which he also patented. This pressing comb was unique because it had curled or slightly bent, tongs or whatever you call them, like the comb was slightly bent so that when you were flattening out your hair, it didn't touch your scalp. All right, you could get very close to the scalp, straighten the hair, and have like a little bend at the end. Again, extremely popular. This is a business that Garrett Morgan started in 1909, and that this business continued until 1976. My father literally packed the last 12-pack of Garrett Morgan black hair oil stain and pomades and sent them off in 1976. And with that, he closed down the business. It's a long time to run a business. This business was very successful and very profitable for my grandfather. It was, along with it allowed him to close up his poultry shop, maybe continue to focus only on children's clothing and not doing piecework for anyone else, and then really focus on his hair products. They were sold in drugstores, Rexalls. I don't know if you have Rexall there, but it was sold all up and down the East Coast, literally from Massachusetts to Florida, and then as far west as Missouri. It was extremely popular, and in some places rivaled Madam C.J. Walker's hair products, and there were several others who also created hair care products. This was a great market, and he was in the right place at the right time, because at this point there was again a growing group of working class and middle class African Americans, primarily in the cities. They had enough disposable income that they could spend on their looks. They wanted to look good and feel good, and be a part of general society, not looked upon, in detrimental ways. And so these products, which also included, again, lip balms, and the lip balms, I do have some of these recipes. And when you look at them, he had one that helped to shrink your lips that had alum in it, and one that helped, if you wanted to have fuller lips, and it had pepper, literally hot peppers in it. And so, whatever beauty, thing you needed to correct, he had something for you. And it went very well for him. This is what gave my grandfather, if I'm honest, the time to really be thoughtful and think of how he wanted to expand his businesses. He didn't think of himself necessarily as an inventor. He thought of himself as an entrepreneur, and he was simply addressing problems or addressing issues or filling a niche that he felt needed to be filled. But he was, smart enough to know that you should patent some of these items, so that you could lay claim to it, and also so that you could fend off the competition. If you can see right now, here's the actual drawing for his patent on his decurling iron. Oops, sorry. Oh, why is it not moving? There we go. All right, so sorry about that. As I said, the hair products were going very well. He was now able, by now, he was having children, he had his home, and he was becoming a recognized member of the community. One thing that he knew, however, was that there were lots and lots of fires happening all around the country. The shirtwaist factory fire in particular really gave him pause and made him think, because, as a reminder, both he and his wife worked in factories where they were sewing clothing. And he understood the importance of picking up, all of the lint and all of the cotton, and keeping things away, from anything that was, keeping it away from anything that was flammable, and protecting against fire. At the time, a fire was probably the most disastrous thing that could happen to any business, to any home. Modern fire safety just was not the case, number one. And number two, it was very difficult for firemen and policemen to enter into a building once the flames started, or if there was a lot of smoke, because they didn't have the appropriate safety apparatus. To be sure, there were plenty of safety hoods, all kinds, and they looked like everything from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea to you name it. There were all kinds of things, but they didn't work. And it was usually, if there was a fire, that was a death sentence for whoever was trapped inside. You know, if they couldn't get out, if they couldn't jump to safety, then there was a problem. And so my grandfather thought there's got to be something that we can do that will eliminate this risk and that will at least allow firemen and policemen to go into, these buildings and rescue some people or figure out, how to, how to beat back the flames and that sort of thing. So he had been toying with some ideas, again, down in his workshop, of a safety hood. How do we create a safety hood that allows policemen and firemen to more effectively do their jobs? So the rumor is that while he was at the circus with my oldest uncle, John, that he noticed it was a boiling hot day, and he noticed that the elephants for the circus would stick their trunks out either up through the top of at the seam of where the tent, the top and the walls met, or they would grab fresh air from the floor, near the floor in the seam there, because that air was cooler and cleaner. So he thought, once again, what can I do? How can we, help? So using that knowledge and really, a lot of experimentation, he came up with the Garrett Morgan safety hood, which you can see in this picture. The Garrett Morgan safety hood draws on two types of technology, really very simple and straightforward. Number one, there is a carbon pack in the, and I don't know if the next picture shows that or not, but in the very back, there's a carbon pack that helps to filter the air. And there's also a tube that hangs down at the bottom like an elephant's trunk. Why? Because the cooler and the cleaner air is at the bottom. The smoke and the heat is up, at the top, because heat rises. And so if you're going to draw in air, it's the cleaner air that is down at the bottom near the floor. And it gave firemen and police officers much more time inside of a building before they had to come out. It was, honestly, it was genius. So again, he thought, well, let's try this out. He took it to the New York Safety Exposition of 1912, and he won first prize. Amazing. However, he couldn't accept his prize because he was African American. He never let that get in his way, however. And so he had a friend that he brought with him and said, listen, I want you to go in, I'll do all the paperwork, I'll pay for everything, but you go in, you pretend you're me. So you're Garrett Morgan, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about this safety hood. And then I'm going to pretend that I am, that I'm your assistant, and I'm going to call myself Big Chief Mason, which he did. So he pretended that he was Native American and that he was from some tribe up in Canada, which he, it was a really obscure tribe that no one, or he thought anyway, nobody would know. And so he would go in, they set up a teepee, they filled it with smoke. He put on the safety hood. He went inside, stayed in there for a while. They would close the door while the other guy was explaining all about the safety hood. Sounds almost like, something you take on the road, right? From the olden days. They would open the flap, out he would come, ta-da, he was all set, take off the safety hood, and he was as right as rain. Well, it won first prize at the New York Safety Exposition of 1912. And the sales were astonishing. Every police force, every fire department wanted the safety hood, until they found out that the real Garrett Morgan was an African American. And then sales started to dry up. But it was okay, because he made a fair profit on the safety hoods that he sold. And he then decided to give the patent of the safety hood to the federal government because, believe it or not, this safety hood was the precursor to the modern. They used the same technology, of course, refined it, but it was the precursor to the modern gas mask that was used in World War I and subsequently. So it was, it was really a good thing that he did. Not only did he make money, but he gave the patent to the federal government for their use, which I think was a very unselfish and admirable thing to do. A few years later, he would have to pull out these safety hoods and use them again. In 1916, the city of Cleveland was growing by leaps and bounds. And a number of, with so many people, water was becoming very brackish, even though we were on one of the Great Lakes. And as a reminder, the Great Lakes here, including Lake Erie, is 20% of the fresh water in the world. Right here, well, for me, a couple of miles away. But the water was being heavily polluted. Industry was polluting the water. There weren't the kind of safeguards then that we have now. All sorts of things. Animals were in the water. It was becoming brackish. It was not drinkable or potable. And so they decided that they needed to build a water filtration plant, and it needed to be way out. And so they literally went 5 miles out on Lake Erie, and of course under the lake, in order to start to dig the tunnels for this water filtration plant. Well, lo and behold, one hot July night in 1916, they were down there digging, and they hit a gas pocket, and it exploded. And a number of men were killed, and the people were, it was pandemonium down there. It was chaos because, a big gas explosion shook everything. Well, when news got back to the shore that this had happened, they immediately sent out a team of rescuers. They had to go out 5 miles across Lake Erie and then down this shaft into where the men were working. Well, as soon as they got down into the shaft and the door opened, they immediately fell to their knees. The fumes were overwhelming. There was fire. There was everything, right? I mean, it was pandemonium down there. These men also then they couldn't rescue anyone because they themselves were now dying from asphyxiation from all the fumes. So everyone was, unsure. They were running around. What do we do? Call the mayor, do this, call that one. Where's the police? Where's the fire? Finally, someone said, hey, where's Garrett Morgan? He's the guy with those safety hoods. Why don't you call him and get him down here? And so everyone thought, fine. They called my grandfather and said, hey, there's been an explosion down here. We need some of those gas masks. Will you come down here and help us out? My grandfather said, of course. He was in his pajamas because it was, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. He went next door and got his brother Frank and said, come on, let's go. Load up the car, get a whole bunch of these in there, and let's get down there. They literally were still in their pajamas and, and shoes. When they got down there, it was a mess, chaos. And the mayor was there. He was worried. Oh, what are we going to do? Oh, what's happening? It was a lot. Families had gathered because they were worried about their loved ones who worked down there. And it was just a crazy time. They told my grandfather and his brother, okay, you know what, let's grab a bunch of these safety hoods, but why don't you go down there first? Take a couple of these guys with you and you go down there first and let's see if they work. All right. And he was told, you cannot wear your shoes down there because there's so much smoke. You have to have your bare feet because you have to feel around to see, if there are, number one, bodies or if there are live people down there. And oh, by the way, there are also live wires down there. And you may, you could get hurt in any number of ways. So my grandfather and his brother Frank and a couple of other guys went down there barefooted with these gas masks, went down, and my grandfather describes absolute horror, sheer terror and horror when they got down there. lots of moaning and, it was crying and pain and you name it, everything. And so they were able to get one of those big carts. They looked around a little bit, put dead bodies in the cart first, and then for the people who were alive, picked them up and put them on top of the cart, and then brought it back to shore. Well, of course, they were met with great, hurrahs and, this is fantastic, you're back, this is good. And other men then put on gas masks and went down as well. And they had essentially like kind of a group, one group would go and come back and another group would go and come back until they got everyone and all of the bodies out of the mine. It was a real awakening for the city of Cleveland for any number of reasons, mainly for public safety. It was not a particularly safe job to have. And the men that did this work were primarily Irish immigrants, and they were called sandhogs because many of them lived right near the shores of Lake Erie. And in some cases, if they were new to the country, they slept right on the shore and then went to work. And so it was quite an awakening in Northeast Ohio, and I think across the country, related to public safety in public works. Nonetheless, my grandfather, he was on the front page of the newspaper as having, wearing the gas mask and helping to pull bodies and people, out of the shaft before he went back in. And the irony is that not one newspaper mentioned his name, not one. They did not acknowledge him as even being there. And others said, even though they stood right next to him, I don't know if those were his gas masks or not. Well, that was a sign of the times. But my grandfather refused to be, undeterred. He knew what he had done, and he was recognized by a number of organizations and he was not recognized by the Carnegie Foundation. He did not receive a Heroes Medal from the Carnegie Foundation because at first they said we weren't sure that he was there, even though he was in the very center of the pictures in the newspaper. And then they said, well, you know what, he really didn't risk life and limb because he invented the gas mask and he knew that they would work. So he didn't really risk anything by going down into the shaft. My grandfather didn't care. He was recognized by other safety forces. He received 2 gold medals, one with a big fat diamond in it, and received other recognition. And so he was fine. The good news is, again, he had his sewing business. Which by then my grandmother was no longer sewing or doing anything. They had a number of employees. At one point, maybe 30 employees that were sewing, and then they were selling their clothing wholesale. They didn't have a retail outlet anymore. He had the Garrett Morgan hair refining company, which was doing gangbusters, doing really well. And as I said, stayed in business until 1976. He had made the gas mask, patented it, sold a number of them, quite a lot. And then when that business dried up for him, not because they were, they were poorly made or they became irrelevant, but because he was African-American, he gave the patent away and he was still able to use the gas mask to save lives and demonstrate to many others that this mask was really fantastic and worthwhile. So, all right, he's by now he's doing okay. And remember also, he's born in 1877. So by 1916, he's in his 30s or 40s. So, and he's got a family and he's doing okay. So he decides he'd like to do some other products. He'd like to, be able to sell his hair care products instead of traveling all around, and selling it personally to barbershops and to other outlets. He'd like to advertise in the newspaper. but the newspaper said, sorry, Mr. Morgan, we love you. You're a great benefit to society here, but we're not going to accept your business. Why? Well, we know why, because he was African American. So they decided that they would not accept his business. They thought that it would put off other business. It might affect, the other mainstream businesses that were advertising in their papers. So what did my grandfather do? He had a saying, I'm either going to go over it, under it, around it, or through it. In this case, I'm not quite sure what he did, but he decided that he was going to, pursue yet again another business venture that was also, although not particularly inventive, but filled a really significant and important niche. So in 1920, he established a newspaper called the Cleveland Call. It then merged with another paper called the Cleveland Post. Okay, and they became the Call and Post. Together, this paper, and still exists, by the way, had the largest circulation of any African-American paper in the state of Ohio. It's still in existence, and it is still distributed in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, although if you subscribe, you can get it anywhere you want. This is a picture of the young men outside of their office, the paper boys for the Cleveland Call and Post. So in addition to sharing the good news that happened in the African-American community, whether it was, not births, weddings, deaths, announcements, business opportunities, and just general news, it was also an outlet for advertising for African-American companies, including his own. If I have to tell you that I was the Christmas baby for like 3 years in a row in the Call and Post. But anyway, and it did very well because not only did African-American companies advertise in the Call and Post, but guess what? Mainstream companies advertised there too, because they knew that there was a marketplace here. African Americans bought goods just like everybody else did, and so why not advertise in this newspaper? It was successful enough that it made the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Press rethink their strategies, and they reached out to him and said, well, Mr. Morgan, we've rethought things, and we think that we would love for you to advertise in our newspaper now. And my grandfather was like, okay, fine. And he did. He advertised in the mainstream newspapers, but of course he continued to advertise and to accept advertisements in the Call and Post as well, which, as I said, is right now still, still published and distributed in the 3 C's, or Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati here in the state of Ohio. I'm particularly proud of this fact because it's again, a long-running newspaper. It still has kind of the same format, opinions and editorials, along with advertisements and positive news about the African-American community. So now he's doing okay, for real. He's got a newspaper, he's getting advertising dollars, he's got his hair company. He doesn't have he's not selling the gas masks anymore, but he's quite comfortable. And so, but continuing to think of new business opportunities as he saw it. So in 1920, right around this time, actually, 1920-21, he sees a terrible accident. This is 1920s style traffic in Northeast Ohio. There was everything on the road: cars, trolleys, horses, carts, pedestrians, you name it, they were in the streets, right? Okay, and so, I think that this may be an exaggerated picture of the pandemonium that was on the street, but I think that everyone can kind of identify with traffic jams and what the road looks like sometimes, right? It was in one such kind of traffic jam that my grandfather and my and my my dad and my Uncle John witnessed a really terrible accident. And it was a horse-drawn cart, and it was hit by an automobile. And the little girl who was in the cart was literally thrown out of the cart into the street, which my dad said was horrifying. It was really frightening for them to see as little boys. And then the horse also was terribly hurt, and the horse had to be put down right on the street. They shot the horse right there. And that was too much. So it was frightening to them, it was disturbing to my grandfather. And he said, you know what, something needs to be done. This is ridiculous. There were at the time traffic signals, and P.S., everything that my grandfather did was an improvement on something that already existed, right? I mean, he didn't invent the thing for the sewing machine. He merely improved it. He didn't invent the traffic signal or the hair straightening comb, for that matter. Or the gas mask, I'm sorry. He merely improved upon it. So, traffic signals at the time were primarily red and green. Okay, and they were invented in the UK back in the 1860s, and so and they were primarily used for the railroads, right? And so it was pretty straightforward. Red, stop. Here's coming the train. Green, proceed. What they didn't have at the time was necessarily a way of warning people that traffic was about to change. Today they call that intelligent transportation systems. Back then they didn't call it anything because they didn't have it. But he thought about this, and he came up with his patent, and he was thinking, what can I do? What can we do in order to help people to know when patterns are about to change, when traffic patterns are about to change? Because again, most accidents happened then and still happen in intersections, right? People don't know what to do. They don't know the right protocol, or they know the protocol and they ignore it, at least now. But he came up with an idea that there would be there would be a warning, right? And so if you notice on traffic signals now, they go from red to green, but from green to yellow and then to red. Why to yellow? That's your warning that traffic is about to change. The pattern of traffic is about to change. And so ideally, if you're not in the intersection, you stop. You don't go into the intersection. If you are in the intersection, then you get out of the intersection, and in order to allow traffic to proceed in the other direction. It seems genius. I mean, it seems like so straightforward, and yet it was genius. The other part of that was that and you'll notice this too, that there is a couple of seconds when all lights are red. And that's to ensure that if somebody is not paying attention, or if they decide to go rogue, that it still doesn't cause an accident, that the lights, doesn't just automatically flip. There's a split second when all the lights are red. They're never all the time. All the lights are never all green, but there is a split second when they're all red. And that, again, gives people who, for whatever reason, feel the need to get into the intersection, that time to get into and out of the intersection. And that is the foundation for the Garrett Morgan traffic signal. You can see here that the traffic signal that he initially envisioned was not the traffic signal that we use today, even though the technology, the intelligent transportation side of it, is the same. And the colors are the same, but it was just configured differently. When he got his patent in 1923 for the traffic signal, he decided he was not going to try and manufacture it. Number one, because he by now was an older man, and just thought this is going to be too much. He had tried it with the gas mask, and it went fine until it didn't. But by now he just thought, I'm okay. I'm not going to kill myself trying to manufacture and sell these on my own. And so he reached out to a variety of companies to share his idea with them. And General Electric decided that they would buy the patent from him. They bought the patent from him, and they bought lots of other patents as well. And they designed the traffic signal that we see now that hangs from a pole. For a while, they did use this traffic signal, and I have somewhere a great picture of somebody that, I mean, there are like arms sticking out all over the place. But that was considered confusing. I mean, it didn't really. If traffic was going in more than 2 or 3 directions, then this became inefficient. And so General Electric bought his patent. They bought it for $40,000, which in 1923 is the equivalent to about $660,000. And he was a very happy man. Excuse me. And he still had the other businesses going, as a reminder. And so with that money, he invested in real estate. He bought property all around Northeast Ohio. He bought about 250 acres of land in a town called Wakeman, Ohio, which is just west of Oberlin. He had family that lived in Oberlin. And so this became a great place for them to relax and enjoy nature. And just as a retreat, really. That property, we've sold off a great number of the acres of land there. You know, my uncles, my father, my grandfather himself sold off, portions of this land. But we still have about 30 acres of this, of what we call the farm. And we still enjoy it very much. And he had planted for my grandmother an apple orchard, which still is productive. So we don't sell them, but we do gather and eat bunches of apples, in our family, and generally enjoy the legacy that my grandfather left to us in Wakeman, Ohio. So, if I can just spend a minute to talk about his civic interests. Once he kind of finished with his inventiveness and his business sense, he realized that he was a prominent member of the African American community, recognized by the community at large, and thought that he needed to, lend his voice to issues of the day. And so one of his big issues was that even though African Americans lived in town, bought houses, went to work, paid taxes, they really didn't have the representation in government that he felt that they deserved. And so my grandfather in 1933 ran for city council. He was really the first African American to take a chance at running for office in Cleveland. He didn't win, but in the course of his campaign, he did show to the powers that be that there was an African American community that had a voice and had a growing voice, and wanted to be represented. And so I'd like to think that he opened the door for the next time there was an election, and he didn't run, but another African American ran and did win. And so he opened a number of doors in Northeast Ohio, for politics. He was one of the founders of the African American, it was called the Negro Business League then, and was a founding member in Cleveland of the NAACP branch. He had a long life. He lived till he was 86 years old. He had a deep love for his family and really prioritized his family. He and my grandmother were married for 55 years before he passed away. But he also had a strong feeling and a deep love for his community. And that legacy lives on here in Northeast Ohio. People, recognize him, and there's still a few old timers. I mean, there's one woman who I know very well. who was in love. She was smitten with my Uncle Cosmo. My dad and his two brothers were apparently extremely handsome young men, and her father knew my grandfather very well. And so whenever he said he was going over to see Garrett Morgan, and she's in her late 90s now, she would jump at the opportunity to go so that she could sit there with a glass of lemonade or a glass of water and oogle my Uncle Cosmo and swoon over him. But people still remember. There are people, not many, who still remember him in this community, and are thrilled that he is a part of our legacy. I'm thrilled that he's a part of my legacy, and never tire of telling his story. I thank you for your attention, and I will take any questions that you may have now. Thank you.
Sandra, thanks so much. We did have several questions in the chat. Cindy Heine wondered was he able to graduate from high school, or was that available to him?
No, he did not graduate from high school. He went to the 6th grade, and he went to a school that was called the Branch School for Colored Children down there in, I guess it was in Claysville, but he went to the 6th grade, and then that was it. He did have lifelong desire for education, and once he was able to, because he said that he learned how to read, write, and figure. And boy, could he figure. But he did hire, he hired tutors throughout his life to teach him different things. And I will say that education was critically important to him. He insisted that all of us be educated, not only his sons, but his grandchildren. We're a small family. There are only 5 grandchildren, 4 girls and 1 boy. And he, as a part of our legacy from him, he set aside the funding that would allow us to go to college, literally wherever we wanted, pretty much wherever we wanted to go for school. And I was a benefactor of that.
That was great. That's wonderful. Someone said that they found the call-in post online, so I guess we can all find that. And someone had asked about his perm. Did he invent that before Madam C.J. Walker, or did she have her perm before that, or hair?
I am not sure, because he actually did not patent that that technology. And so I have to say that it may have been right around the same time, or he may have been a little bit earlier than her, because again, he had a 6th grade education. He wasn't a chemist. She wasn't either, quite honestly, but he came up with this. It was happenstance. Had he not rubbed his hands on this cloth and then rubbed it on the dog and then rubbed it on himself, he may never have known, and it's a good thing that he knew what chemicals he was working with, so that he could perfect the formula. My great uncle, whose name was Carl Latrobe, Uncle Latrobe, said that it was wildly popular in the 20s and 30s, this relaxer. And, well, even before then, but for him, it was in the 20s and the 30s, along with this cap, and that men would actually get together. They'd all get together on a Thursday night or a Wednesday night, and they would do each other's hair and put that cap on, so that when it was time to go out on Friday night, they were all ready to go.
I love it. There's a lot of very complimentary comments in the chat, Sandra, talking about what an amazing person he was, and a good reminder that building on the ideas of others and improving things is the way most progress happens. Mm-hmm. And someone said, I hope the story keeps spreading. Thank you for sharing it. Informative and inspiring. Just a wonderful program, and his life is just amazing. So,
can I ask a question, Mary?
Yes, please do, Mark.
This is Mark. Sandra, thank you very much. First of all, I had to take a FaceTime call from a grandchild, so I did you know your grandfather very well?
I did not. I was born in and my
Yeah.
grandfather died in 1963. I was about 2 when my grandfather died. In fact, a little shy of 2 years old when my grandfather died. And so I did not know him well. Well, I didn't, I mean, I couldn't say I didn't know him at all, really. However, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and my father is Garrett Morgan Jr. And my father carried the flag for my grandfather. Number one, he was the executor of the estate, and so literally everything was somewhere in our house, right? I mean, it was. My father eventually gave a load of stuff to the Western Reserve Historical Society, but there was quite a long time that quite a lot of materials were just in our house. The traffic signal was in our living room for years. And I used to tease that we used it to regulate traffic down the hallway to go to the bathroom. And the gas mask was at the house too. I mean, there were several of them. And I remember, I was in kindergarten, and I wanted to, in Mrs. Bauer's class, and I had taken all of my Barbies, like you have show and tell, and I'd kind of exhausted all of my toys and that sort of thing. And so I asked my dad if I could take the gas mask. He called Mrs. Bauer and she said, yes, that'd be cool. Why don't you come in? You come with the gas mask and with the camera. And so my dad came in. That was my show and tell, was the gas mask. And then I got to, put it on, which imagine that it came pretty far down, on me. And then I chased around a few kids while wearing it. And then we took it off, and then he took it back home. So again, I didn't know my grandfather, but I lived with Garrett Morgan my entire life, literally and figuratively.
And I have one other question. I recently listened to an interview with an African-American economist, and her PhD research was looking at patents for African-Americans prior to 1877 and after, and really looking at the great decline after our country changed, and looking at the real loss for the whole society. How did he get those patents? Did he have a special lawyer that was working with him?
Yeah, I mean, he was very savvy in that way. He hired lawyers, and in fact, the lawyers are still, the law firm still exists, and they are. I mean, they do a lot of stuff, but there are primarily technology and patent lawyers even today. And they still have a lot of his documents. I mean, the letters and the signed documents and that sort of thing, they still have at their law firm.
Wonderful. There was a comment in the chat also, Sandra, that said Garrett Morgan was so much more than a mask and traffic light inventor. A wonderful life and a wonderful man. Do we have more questions? If not, I'm just going to finish up with my little, thank you so much for this wonderfully informative program, Sandra. I know I've learned a huge amount about Garrett Morgan's extraordinary life, and I'm sure our audience has also. Remember to tell family members and friends about tonight's program. They can view the recording on our website, www.lwvlexington.com, by looking under community forums under the events section. Check our website or Outreach Circle for upcoming events. If you aren't familiar with Outreach Circle, it is an app you can download to your phone, so you can be one click away from taking action with the League of Women Voters. Download it for free on either the App Store for iPhone users or the Play Store for Android users. Remember, Outreach Circle is one word. Search for Kentucky to join both the Lexington and the state's league's outreach circles. One final note, our next community forum will be Thursday, March 10th, 7 to 8 p.m. via Zoom, when we will celebrate Women's History Month with a presentation by Dr. Karen Cotton McDaniel, Professor Emeritus, Kentucky State University, on the life of Dr. Mary Britton, the first licensed African-American female physician in Kentucky who was also a Kentucky suffragist. So you can register on our website under events. And thanks everybody for being here. I thought this was a wonderful program, and Sandra, thanks so much for doing this for us. And I hope you have many more invitations to talk about your grandfather.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I really was very pleased to join you this evening. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sandra, so much.